The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the sharp, cruel laughter of Chloe Vane. She stood next to Mark, looking immaculate in designer silk, pointing a manicured finger at the woman sitting across the aisle. That woman was Sarah Jenkins, heavily pregnant, swollen, and trembling with exhaustion. Chloe didn't just want to win, she wanted to destroy. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with venom, and mocked Shreya's appearance, calling her unfit and pathetic for trying to keep a man who had clearly moved on. But the smirk would soon be wiped from her face. Judge Evelyn Stone, who had watched the entire display with eyes like flint, leaned forward and asked just one question. One simple question that would flip the entire case upside down and expose a secret so dark it would ruin them all. The divorce papers had arrived on a Tuesday, the same day Sarah Jenkins found out the gender of her baby. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, a small, intimate dinner with her husband Mark, to reveal that they were having a boy. Instead, she came home to an empty house and a large manila envelope sitting on the marble kitchen island. Sarah stood in the foyer of their sprawling Seattle home, a home she had designed herself. She was an interior decorator, and every corner of this house whispered of the life she thought she was building. But the silence that evening was heavy, almost predatory. She opened the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her breath hitched. She dropped the papers, her hand instinctively going to her stomach, where her son kicked a small, innocent reminder of the bond that was currently being severed on paper. "Mark!" she called out, her voice trembling. There was no answer, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. She dialed again. Same result. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in her chest. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was losing her stability at 7 months pregnant. Mark Jenkins was a powerful man, a partner at Jenkins & Ross, one of the city's most aggressive corporate law firms. He knew how to dismantle people. He did it for a living. But Sarah never thought he would turn that machinery on her. The front door clicked open an hour later. Sarah spun around, wiping tears from her face, hoping for an explanation, an apology, a mistake. Mark walked in, but he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was Chloe Vane. Sarah knew her. Everyone knew Chloe. She was 24, a paralegal at Mark's firm, with ambition that burned brighter than her intellect. She was beautiful in a sharp, synthetic way, and tonight she was looking at Sarah not with sympathy, but with triumph. "Mark," Sarah whispered, gripping the edge of the island for support. "What is this?" "The papers, and her." Mark didn't look at Sarah. He looked at his watch, then at Chloe, as if checking a schedule. He was a handsome man, tall with graying temples that usually made him look distinguished. Tonight, they made him look cold. "I didn't want to drag this out, Sarah," Mark said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I've moved out. My things are already at the penthouse." "The penthouse?" Sarah repeated, her mind reeling. "Mark, I'm pregnant. We're having a son. You can't just—" "I can," he interrupted smoothly. "And I have. Chloe and I have been together for 6 months. We're in love. And quite frankly, I'm done pretending that our marriage is working. It's been dead for years." "Dead for years?" Sarah's voice rose, cracking. "We went to Italy 3 months ago. We planned the nursery last week." Chloe stepped forward, then her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. She looked Sarah up and down, her eyes lingering on Sarah's swollen ankles and the loose maternity dress she wore. "Oh, sweetie." Chloe purred a sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. He was just being nice. He didn't want to stress the baby. But let's be real. Look at you, and look at him. Mark needs a partner who matches his status, not a nesting hen. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Get out of my house. Actually, Mark said, finally looking her in the eye, it's my house. I bought it before the marriage. The deed is in my name. You have until the end of the month to vacate. You can't do this, Sarah cried, stepping toward him. I have nowhere to go. My family is in Ohio. I can't travel this late in the pregnancy. Mark sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. Talk to my lawyer, Sarah, but I'd advise you not to fight. I'm offering you a small settlement. Take it. If you fight me, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing. Not the house, not the money, and certainly not the baby. Sarah froze. What did you say? You heard me, Mark said, opening the door for Chloe. I'm a lawyer, Sarah. I know how to paint a picture. An unstable, hormonal, unemployed mother. I'll get full custody before the ink is dry on the birth certificate. Don't test me. They walked out, leaving the door wide open to the cold, rainy night. Sarah stood there, the wind blowing the divorce papers across the floor, realizing that the man she loved hadn't just left her. He had declared war. The weeks leading up to the preliminary hearing were a blur of nausea, fear, and lawyers. Sarah had managed to hire a lawyer, a man named Mr. Elias Harrison. He was older, semi-retired, and worked out of a small office above a bakery. He was cheap, which was all Sarah could afford, after Mark froze their joint bank accounts the morning after he left. He's playing dirty, Sarah, Mr. Harrison said, looking over the files with a frown. He's claiming you've been mentally unstable for years. He has affidavits from witnesses, probably his friends, claiming you're prone to violent outbursts. That's a lie. Sarah slammed her hand on the desk, then winced as the baby kicked hard. I've never hurt anyone. I'm a decorator. I arrange pillows. I believe you, Harrison said gently. But in court the truth is malleable. Mark is powerful. He's trying to starve you out, so you settle for pennies. But Sarah refused to settle. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her son. She moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city using the last of her personal savings. It was a stark contrast to the luxury she was used to. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled of stale smoke, and she spent her nights weeping, holding her belly. Meanwhile, Mark and Chloe were living their best life, and they made sure Sarah saw it. Chloe began a campaign of digital harassment. She posted photos on Instagram constantly, her and Mark, at galas, them on a yacht, them in the nursery Sarah had designed, which Chloe had now renovated with gaudy gold accents. She tagged Sarah in every post. Upgrade, Mahash, real love. Sorry. Not sorry. But it didn't stop at social media. One afternoon while Sarah was grocery shopping, counting her pennies to buy prenatal vitamins and bread, she ran into them. It wasn't an accident. Mark was pushing a cart filled with expensive wine and steaks. Chloe was hanging onto his arm, wearing a tight white dress. They spotted Sarah in the cereal aisle. Sarah tried to turn her cart around, but Chloe was too fast. Sarah! Chloe called out, her voice, feigning sweetness but loud enough to turn heads. Oh my God, Mark, look. She looks huge. Sarah gripped the handle of her cart. Leave me alone, Chloe. We just wanted to see how you were doing, Chloe said, stepping closer, invading Sarah's personal space. Mark was worried you might be, neglecting yourself. You look so tired. Are you sure you're fit to raise a child? You can barely take care of your hair." Shoppers were starting to stare. Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She was wearing sweatpants and a messy bun, because she could barely bend over to tie her shoes, let alone style her hair. "I'm doing fine," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Mark, please, tell her to stop." Mark looked at Sarah with a mixture of pity and disgust. "She's right, Sarah. You look like a mess. This is exactly what I'm talking about in the filing. You're letting yourself go. How can you care for a baby when you look like a homeless person?" "I look like this because you cut off my access to our money," Sarah snapped. "I'm living in a motel, Mark." "Choices, Sarah," Mark said coldly. "You chose to fight the settlement. This is on you." Chloe laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "Don't worry, Sarah. When we get custody, I'll make sure the baby is dressed in designer. Unlike you." She reached out and poked Sarah's stomach. It was a violation so sudden and shocking that Sarah recoiled, stumbling back into a display of canned soup. The cans crashed down around her, creating a chaotic, deafening noise. "Oops," Chloe smirked. "Clumsy." Sarah lay on the linoleum floor, soup cans rolling around her, tears streaming down her face. Mark didn't offer a hand. He didn't check if she was hurt. He simply put a protective arm around Chloe and steered her away from the crazy woman on the floor. "Let's go, honey," Mark said loudly for the benefit of the onlookers. "It's sad to see her like this." As they walked away, Sarah lay there, humiliated, clutching her stomach. But in that moment of absolute rock bottom, something inside her shifted. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They thought she was weak. They thought she was just a nesting hen they could kick aside. They were wrong. She picked herself up, ignoring the whispers of the strangers around her. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a mother, and she was going to burn their world to the ground, even if she had to do it with soup cans and a motel budget. The court date was set for 2 weeks later, and Sarah was ready. The Superior Court of Seattle was an imposing building, all gray stone and high pillars designed to make you feel small. On the day of the hearing, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that mirrored the tension inside courtroom 4B. Sarah arrived early with Mr. Harrison. She wore her best remaining dress, a simple navy blue maternity gown she had steamed in the motel shower. She looked tired, yes, but she held her head high. Mark and Chloe arrived 10 minutes late, making a grand entrance. Mark was flanked by 2 junior associates from his firm, carrying boxes of files. Chloe was dressed as if she were attending a funeral for an enemy she hated, black lace, red lipstick, and diamonds that caught the fluorescent lights. The presiding judge was the Honorable Evelyn Stone. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw the nameplate. Judge Stone was a legend in the state. She was known as the Stone Wall. She was 60 years old, with steel-grey hair pulled back into a severe bun, and reading glasses perched on the end of a sharp nose. She was known for having zero tolerance for theatrics and a deep hatred for arrogance. Mark, however, seemed unfazed. He whispered something to Chloe, and they both chuckled. He clearly thought his reputation as a high-powered corporate attorney would give him the upper hand. He was used to golfing with judges not standing before them in family court. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Stone swept in, her black robes billowing. She sat down, arranged her files, and peered over her glasses at the courtroom. Her gaze lingered on Chloe for a second too long, before shifting to the lawyers. "Case number 49201, Jenkins versus Jenkins." Judge Stone announced, her voice raspy and authoritative. We are here for a preliminary hearing regarding asset division and custody of the unborn child. Mr. Jenkins, you are the petitioner. I am your honor. Mark stood up, buttoning his jacket with practiced smoothness. And I intend to prove that my wife, Sarah Jenkins, is unfit to parent, and that our prenuptial agreement— There is no prenuptial agreement, Mr. Harrison interrupted, standing up slowly. Your Honor, Mr. Jenkins is referring to a document signed under duress 3 days before the wedding, which was never notarized properly. We will get to the assets later, Judge Stone said, waving a hand dismissively. I'm more concerned about the immediate welfare of the mother and child. I have read the affidavits. Mr. Jenkins, you have frozen all joint assets. I had to, Your Honor, Mark said, putting on his concerned citizen face. Sarah has been manic, spending recklessly. I was protecting the marital estate. Recklessly. Judge Stone raised an eyebrow. I see a bank statement here showing she spent $50 at a grocery store and $30 at a pharmacy. Is that reckless in your tax bracket, Mr. Jenkins? Mark stiffened. It's a pattern of behavior, Your Honor. She is unstable. Unstable? Chloe spoke up from the gallery behind the plaintiff's table. She wasn't supposed to speak, but she couldn't help herself. She attacked me in a grocery store 2 weeks ago. She threw cans at me. The courtroom went quiet. Mr. Harrison sighed and put his head in his hands. Judge Stone slowly turned her eyes toward Chloe. And you are— I'm Chloe Vane, she said, standing up and flipping her hair. I'm Mark's partner, and a witness to her craziness. Miss Vane, Judge Stone said, her voice dangerously low. Unless you are sworn in, you will remain silent. This is a court of law, not a reality television show. Sit down. Chloe huffed, sitting down but rolling her eyes visibly. Mark touched her arm to calm her, but the damage was done. Judge Stone had marked her. Your Honor, Mark continued, trying to regain control. Miss Vane is passionate because she has seen the abuse I've suffered. Sarah is vindictive. Look at her. He gestured to Sarah. She refuses to work. She leeches off my success, and now she's using this pregnancy as a weapon. Sarah felt the tears pricking her eyes, but she bit the inside of her cheek. Don't cry, she told herself. He wants you to cry. I see, Judge Stone said. She looked at Sarah. Mrs. Jenkins, do you have a job? I was a freelance interior designer. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice quiet but clear. But Mark insisted I stop working when I got pregnant. He said he wanted me to focus on the baby. Now no one will hire me at 8 months pregnant. She's lazy, Chloe whispered loudly. Judge Stone slammed her gavel. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. One more outburst from the gallery, and I will have you removed, Judge Stone warned. She turned back to Mark. Mr. Jenkins, you are a partner at Jenkins & Ross, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And your reported income last year was $3 million. Approximately, Mark said, puffing his chest out slightly. And yet, Judge Stone picked up a piece of paper. You have left your pregnant wife with zero access to funds, forcing her to live in the Starlight Motel on Route 9. It's temporary, Mark said defensively, until she agrees to the settlement. So you are using poverty as a coercion tactic? Judge Stone asked. I'm using leverage. Mark corrected his arrogance, slipping through. That's how negotiations work. Judge Stone stared at him for a long, silent moment. This is not a corporate merger, Mr. Jenkins. This is a family, and frankly, I am unimpressed. Mark's face reddened. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this. He leaned over to his junior associate and whispered something angry. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrison said, "we are requesting immediate spousal support and the release of funds for medical expenses. Sarah has a doctor's appointment tomorrow she cannot pay for." "Denied," Mark barked before the judge could speak. "We contest the paternity." The air left the room. Sarah gasped. "Mark, you know he's yours. Do I—" Mark sneered. "You were spending a lot of time with that contractor during the renovations last year." It was a lie. A blatant, disgusting lie designed to delay the proceedings and humiliate her. Judge Stone looked at Mark with genuine distaste. "You are requesting a paternity test." "I am," Mark said. "And until that test proves the child is mine, I am not liable for a dime of support." It was a stalling tactic. Paternity tests couldn't usually be done safely until after the birth, or required expensive non-invasive procedures Mark would likely delay approving. He was trying to starve her out completely. Chloe smirked from the bench, pulling out her phone to text someone, likely updating her friends on how well Mark was destroying his wife. "Very well," Judge Stone said, her face unreadable. "If that is the game you wish to play, Mr. Jenkins." "It's not a game, Your Honor. It's the law," Mark said smugly. "We shall see," Judge Stone said. "We will recess for lunch. When we return, I want to hear testimony from your witness, Ms. Vane. Since she seems so eager to speak, let's put her under oath." Chloe's eyes lit up. This was her moment. She grabbed Mark's hand and squeezed it. She was going to go up there and tear Sarah apart. Sarah looked at Mr. Harrison in panic. "What is she going to say? She'll lie." "Let her lie." Mr. Harrison said, a strange twinkle in his eye. "Judge Stone is smart. Sometimes you have to give people enough rope to hang themselves." But Sarah wasn't so sure. As she watched Chloe and Mark strut out of the courtroom for lunch, laughing, she felt a sense of impending doom. They looked unbeatable. She didn't know that the judge had noticed something. She didn't know that while Mark was bragging about his income, Judge Stone had been looking at the financial affidavits Chloe had submitted as part of the case file affidavits that contained a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that Mark and Chloe hadn't even thought to double-check it. The storm was coming, and it wasn't the one outside. The afternoon session began with a heavy, suffocating atmosphere. The rain was now lashing against the courthouse windows, a rhythmic drumming that underscored the tension in the room. "The defense calls Chloe Vane to the stand," Mark announced, acting as his own lead counsel. He shot a smug look at Mr. Harrison. Chloe walked to the stand as if it were a runway. She had reapplied her lipstick during the break, a shade of crimson that looked like fresh blood. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, crossing her legs and smoothing her skirt. "Ms. Vane." Mark began, standing casually with one hand in his pocket. "Please tell the court your relationship to the parties involved." "I am Mark's fiancée," she said, flashing a diamond ring that Sarah hadn't noticed before. Sarah felt a physical blow to her chest. A fiancé, already. "And I was an acquaintance of Sarah." "And in your observation, how would you describe Sarah's behavior over the last year?" Chloe turned her head to look directly at Sarah. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. "Erratic. Dangerous. Honestly, I've been terrified for Mark. Sarah was always screaming, throwing things. She was jealous of his success. She refused to support his career. She just sat at home spending his money and getting, well, bigger. Objection. Mr. Harrison creaked to his feet. Relevance regarding the plaintiff's weight. Sustained. Judge Stone said, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. Ms. Vane, stick to the facts. The fact is, Chloe continued unbothered, she's unfit. 2 weeks ago at the grocery store, she attacked me. I was just trying to say hello, to be civil, and she started screaming and knocking over displays. It was humiliating. She's mentally unstable, Your Honor. I don't think she should be allowed near a child. Mark deserves a safe home for his baby. If it's even his. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Every word was a twisted dagger. The way Chloe painted herself as the victim was masterful. Thank you, Miss Vane, Mark said softly. No further questions. Mr. Harrison stood up slowly. He looked tired. He shuffled his papers and approached the stand. Ms. Vane, the old lawyer began. You say you've been terrified of Sarah. Yes, Chloe said dramatically. And yet you moved into her home before she had even moved out. You slept in her bed. Mark asked me to. Chloe shrugged. He needed support. You stated earlier that Sarah is financially irresponsible. Can you elaborate? She buys junk, Chloe scoffed. She doesn't contribute. Mark pays for everything. The house, the cars, the vacations. She's a leech. I see, Harrison said. He paused, looking at a document in his hand. And you, Ms. Vane, you are a paralegal. What is your salary? Objection, Mark shouted. Relevance. It goes to the witness's credibility regarding financial judgment, Harrison countered. Overruled, Judge Stone said. Answer the question. I make $45,000 a year, Chloe said, lifting her chin defiantly. But Mark takes care of me. He certainly does, Harrison muttered. No further questions. Sarah felt a wave of despair. Harrison hadn't landed a punch. He hadn't exposed the lies. Chloe stepped down from the stand with a triumphant smirk, winking at Mark as she passed him. They thought they had won. They thought the old man lawyer and the crazy wife were done for. But they had forgotten one person in the room. Judge Evelyn Stone was not looking at the lawyers. She was looking at a file that had been sitting on the corner of her desk, a file that had been subpoenaed quietly by the court clerk regarding the renovations Chloe had bragged about earlier. Ms. Vane, Judge Stone's voice cut through the room like a razor blade. Please retake the stand. I have a few questions of my own. Chloe froze halfway to her seat. She looked at Mark. Mark frowned but nodded. Go ahead, honey. It's fine. It was not fine. Chloe sat back down, looking slightly annoyed but still confident. She adjusted the microphone. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Stone took off her reading glasses and cleaned them slowly with a cloth. The silence stretched out for an agonizing 30 seconds. When she put the glasses back on, her eyes were magnified, intense, and focused entirely on Chloe. Ms. Vane, the judge began, her voice deceptively calm. You testified that your relationship with Mr. Jenkins began 6 months ago. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Chloe said. We fell in love quickly. And you testified that you consider Mrs. Jenkins to be financially irresponsible because she spends Mr. Jenkins' money. Yes, she wastes it. And you, the judge gestured with a pen, you are a paralegal. You understand the concept of perjury, correct? Of course, Chloe scoffed. I know the law better than she does. She jerked a thumb at Sarah. Good, Judge Stone said. She opened the file in front of her. I am looking at a receipt for the renovation of the nursery in the marital home. The renovation you mentioned earlier. The one with the gold accents. Chloe smiled. Yes, I designed it. It's beautiful. Much better than the drab thing Sarah picked out. The receipt is dated October 14th of last year, Judge Stone read. That is 14 months ago. Mark stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I don't see the relevance. Sit down, Mr. Jenkins, Judge Stone barked. The sheer volume of her voice made Mark drop back into his chair. She turned back to Chloe. 14 months ago. That is 8 months before you say your relationship started, and 6 months before Mrs. Jenkins even announced her pregnancy. Chloe blinked. I was helping Mark. As an employee. I have an eye for design. Is that so? Judge Stone flipped a page. Then why is the invoice for the custom gold crib signed by Chloe Jenkins? The room went dead silent. Sarah gasped. She looked at Mark. He was pale, staring at the table. It was a joke, Chloe stammered, her confidence cracking. Just a little joke between us. A joke, Judge Stone repeated. Forgery is a joke to you. But that's not what interests me most, Ms. Vane. The judge leaned forward. This was it. The trap was set. You claimed Sarah was a leech for spending Mark's money. You claimed you were the responsible one. You claimed you only started dating 6 months ago. Judge Stone held up a bank statement. So can you explain to me why, according to this transfer record from the Cayman Islands, the $250,000 used to pay for that nursery renovation and the down payment on the penthouse you are currently living in came from Sarah Jenkins's inheritance trust fund? Sarah's head snapped up. What? That's impossible, Mark shouted, jumping up again. That account is closed. It is now, Judge Stone said, her voice icy. Because you drained it. She turned her eyes back to Chloe, who was now trembling. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the terrified look of a child caught stealing. So here is the question, Ms. Vane, Judge Stone said softly. The one question that will determine if you walk out of here or if you leave in handcuffs. The judge waited until every person in the room was holding their breath. Did you knowingly conspire with Mr. Jenkins to siphon $3 million from his wife's private inheritance over the last 2 years while pretending to be his employee? Or were you simply too incompetent to realize that the credit card he gave you bore the name of the woman you just mocked in my courtroom? Chloe's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Mark. Mark was shaking his head frantically, mouthing, "Shut up, shut up." But Chloe Vane was not a woman who went down with the ship. She was a survivor. And she realized in that split second that Mark had used her just as much as he had used Sarah. If she lied now, with that paper in the judge's hand, she was going to prison for fraud. She looked at Sarah, broken pregnant Sarah, and then at Mark, who was sweating through his expensive suit. "I didn't know it was her money," Chloe whispered into the microphone, her voice breaking. Then she screamed it. "I didn't know. He told me it was his. He told me she was broke. He gave me the card and told me to sign whatever I wanted. He said he was hiding the money so she wouldn't get it in the divorce. Pandemonium broke out. He admitted to hiding assets," Judge Stone asked, her voice booming over the noise. "Yes." Chloe was crying now, mascara running down her face. "He's been moving money for 2 years. He said he was going to leave her destitute so she'd lose the baby. He made me do it." Mark slammed his fist on the table. "You stupid bailiff," Judge Stone shouted. "Restrain the plaintiff." 2 officers stepped forward and grabbed Mark by the arms as he lunged toward the witness stand. Sarah sat frozen, her hand over her mouth. It wasn't just a divorce. It wasn't just an affair. It was a heist. Mark hadn't just fallen out of love. He had methodically robbed her blind while she was carrying his child. Judge Stone banged her gavel, silencing the room. She looked at Mark, who was now being held back by the bailiffs, his face red with rage. Then she looked at Sarah. The judge's expression softened just for a moment. "This hearing is no longer about custody," Judge Stone declared. "This is now a criminal matter." The chaos that erupted in courtroom 4B was unlike anything the Superior Court had seen in years. The bailiffs had Mark pinned against the defense table, his face a mask of purple rage as he screamed obscenities at Chloe. Chloe was sobbing into her hands, realizing that her immunity had evaporated the moment she admitted to signing forged documents. Judge Stone was the only calm person in the room. She was writing furiously on her docket, her face set in grim determination. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Stone's voice cut through the noise, amplified by the microphone. "You are hereby held in contempt of court. Furthermore, based on the testimony of your co-conspirator and the evidence of grand larceny and fraud presented by the court's independent audit, I am ordering you to be taken into immediate custody. Bail is denied due to flight risk." "You can't do this," Mark spat as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "I am a partner at Jenkins and Ross. I know the governor." "You were a partner," Judge Stone corrected, looking over her glasses. "I imagine once this transcript is released, your partners will be shredding your contract before you reach the holding cell. Get him out of my sight." As they dragged Mark away, he locked eyes with Sarah. He expected to see fear. He expected to see the weak, hormonal woman he had mocked for months. Instead, he saw something that chilled him to the bone. Sarah wasn't crying anymore. She was watching him with a look of absolute cold indifference. She didn't look away until the heavy oak doors slammed shut behind him. Only then did Sarah let out a breath, her hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. Mr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Sarah," the old lawyer said. "The assets are frozen. The forensic accountants will recover what's left of the inheritance. You're going to get the house back." But the drama wasn't quite finished. As the adrenaline crashed, a sharp, searing pain ripped through Sarah's abdomen. She gasped, dropping the glass. It shattered on the floor, echoing the destruction of her marriage. "Sarah?" Harrison asked, alarmed. "The baby," Sarah whispered, clutching her stomach as another wave of pain hit her harder this time. It's time. Call 911, Judge Stone shouted from the bench, dropping her judicial demeanor instantly to rush down the steps. The next 12 hours were a blur of sirens, hospital lights, and agony. Sarah was alone in the delivery room. No husband to hold her hand, no partner to breathe with her. But as she pushed, she realized she didn't need Mark. His absence wasn't a void. It was a relief. She was bringing her son into a world where his father couldn't hurt him. At 3:42 a.m., amidst a thunderstorm that shook the hospital windows, Liam Jenkins was born. He was small, screaming, and perfect. 2 days later, Sarah was sitting up in her hospital bed, holding Liam, when Mr. Harrison knocked on the door. He was holding a teddy bear and a thick file. "He's beautiful," Harrison smiled, placing the bear on the nightstand. "He's safe," Sarah corrected, stroking Liam's head. "That's all that matters." Harrison sat down in the visitor's chair. "Mark has been charged with 6 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. Chloe took a plea deal this morning. She's testifying against him in exchange for probation, but her career is over." The Bar Association has already stripped Mark's license. Sarah nodded, staring out the window. Good. There is one thing I still don't understand, Sarah, Harrison said, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Judge Stone is an old friend of mine. We go back 30 years. She told me something interesting yesterday. Sarah turned to look at him. Oh. She told me that the anonymous tip that led the court clerk to subpoena the renovation records, it came from an encrypted email address 3 months ago, long before I took your case. Harrison leaned forward. Mark thought you were clueless. He thought you were just a nesting hen, obsessed with pillows. But you knew, didn't you? You knew about the accounts before he even filed for divorce. Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, and a small, sad smile played on her lips. Mark is a narcissist, Elias, Sarah said softly. He leaves his laptop open. He talks loudly on the phone because he thinks I'm too stupid to understand finance. I saw the transfers 6 months ago. I saw the texts to Chloe. Harrison looked stunned. Why didn't you confront him then? You could have saved yourself the motel, the humiliation. Because if I confronted him then, he would have hidden the money better. He would have gaslit me, dragged it out for years, and I would have lost, Sarah said, her voice hardening. I needed him to get overconfident. I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to be so arrogant that he would bring his mistress into a courtroom and lie under oath. She looked up at the lawyer, her eyes fierce. I didn't play the victim, Elias. I played the bait, and he swallowed it whole. Harrison sat back, a look of profound respect on his face. The twist wasn't that the judge saved Sarah. The twist was that Sarah had orchestrated her own salvation using Mark's ego as the weapon against him. 6 months later, the day of judgment. The federal courthouse was different from the family court. It was colder, sterner, and devoid of the domestic drama that usually filled the hallways of the lower courts. Today, the air smelled of floor wax and impending doom. Mark Jenkins sat at the defense table, but he was a shadow of the man who had strutted into Judge Stone's courtroom half a year ago. His tailored Italian suits had been replaced by a generic, ill-fitting grey suit provided by his public defender. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was thinning and greying rapidly at the temples. The arrogance that had been his trademark was gone, replaced by a twitchy, hollow-eyed desperation. He wasn't just facing a divorce anymore. He was facing the United States government. The charges were extensive. Wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. The forensic audit ordered by Judge Stone had uncovered a web of deceit that went back years. Mark hadn't just stolen Sarah's inheritance. He had been laundering money through shell companies for questionable clients, using the law firm's accounts as a shield. When Sarah's inheritance hit his radar, he saw it as a way to plug the holes in his own sinking ship. The gallery was packed. Former colleagues from Jenkins and Ross were there, not to support him, but to witness the final nail in the coffin of the man who had nearly ruined the firm's reputation. And in the front row, sitting with a posture of regal calm, was Sarah. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a survivor. She wore a cream-colored blazer and held a small notepad. Next to her was Mr. Harrison, looking smug as he cleaned his spectacles. The defendant will rise, the federal judge, a man named Justice Halloway, commanded. Mark stood up, his legs shaking visibly. Mr. Jenkins, Justice Halloway began peering down from the high bench. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed. But rarely have I seen such a calculated, malicious dismantling of a spouse's life. You didn't just steal money. You attempted to steal a woman's sanity, her reputation and her child, all to cover your own crimes. Mark licked his dry lips. Your Honor, if I may. I was under immense pressure. The market. My judgment was clouded. I never intended to hurt Sarah. I still love her. A ripple of scoffing laughter moved through the gallery. Sarah didn't react. She simply watched him, her face unreadable. Save your platitudes for the parole board, Justice Halloway snapped. The testimony provided by your co-conspirator, Ms. Vane, was quite illuminating. She detailed how you instructed her to forge signatures while your wife was in the hospital for pregnancy complications. That is not clouded judgment, Mr. Jenkins. That is predatory. Mark flinched at Chloe's name. That had been the ultimate betrayal. Chloe, realizing she was facing jail time, had flipped on Mark within hours of their arrest. She had handed over every text, every email, every recording she had secretly made of him boasting about his plans. She had buried him to save herself. Sarah Jenkins, the judge called out. You have submitted a victim impact statement. Do you wish to read it? Sarah stood up. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. She adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Mark. For the first time in 6 months, he met her eyes. He looked for pity. He found none. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. Mark Jenkins told this court that he stole because of financial pressure. That is a lie. He stole because he felt entitled. He stole because he viewed me not as a partner, but as an asset to be liquidated. She paused, taking a breath. He told the world I was unfit to be a mother. He tried to gaslight me into believing I was insane. He left me in a motel room with $10 to my name while I carried his son. But this isn't about the money. The money can be recovered. This is about the trust he incinerated. I am not asking for vengeance, Your Honor. I am asking for safety. I am asking that my son grows up in a world where he knows that actions have consequences and that no man is above the law, no matter how expensive his suit is. She closed her notebook. That is all. The silence that followed was heavy. Justice Halloway nodded slowly. Mark Jenkins, the judge boomed. On the counts of wire fraud and grand larceny, I sentence you to 144 months, 12 years in federal prison. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $3.2 million. Officers, take him away. Mark let out a strangled cry. 12 years. No, you can't, Sarah. Sarah, please. He lunged toward the railing, reaching for her. Sarah. I'm the father of your child. Sarah. 2 marshals grabbed him, hauling him back. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She simply watched as the man who had promised to love her forever was dragged through the side door, his screams echoing until the heavy wood slammed shut, cutting him off. Mr. Harrison leaned over. Are you okay? Sarah smoothed her blazer, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. I'm fine, Elias. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'm free. The ruins of Chloe Vane. Across the city, far away from the federal courthouse, Chloe Vane was living her own personal sentence. She had avoided prison time, thanks to her plea deal, but her punishment was a different kind of cage. The legal community was small, and word traveled fast. She was blacklisted from every law firm, notary office, and corporate HR department in Washington state. Her face had been splashed across the local news as the Mistress conspirator. Chloe sat on a stool behind the counter of Pump and Grind, a cheap 24-hour gym in an industrial district. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, giving her skin a sickly pallor. She wore a polyester polo shirt that was 2 sizes too big, with a name tag that sat crookedly on her chest. "Hey, towel, girl," a sweaty man grunted, tossing a used, damp towel onto the counter in front of her. "Bin's full, fix it." Chloe stared at the towel. A year ago, she was drinking champagne on a yacht. A year ago, she was shopping for Louboutins with a stolen credit card. Now she was towel girl. "I'll get to it in a minute," she muttered, not making eye contact. "You'll get to it now," the man snapped. "Or I'll tell the manager you're on your phone again." Chloe gritted her teeth, grabbing the spray bottle. As she walked around the counter to wipe down a machine, she glanced up at the bank of TVs mounted on the wall. The news was on. Breaking news. Disgraced attorney Mark Jenkins. Sentenced to 12 years. The camera cut to footage outside the courthouse. There was Sarah looking radiant, holding a baby carrier. Reporters were swarming her, but she looked calm, dignified. The chyron beneath her read, "Sarah Jenkins, the whistleblower who took down a firm." Chloe felt a hot, acidic bile rise in her throat. It wasn't fair. She had done everything Mark told her to. She was just trying to secure a future. Why did Sarah get to be the hero Sarah was supposed to be, the loser, the dumpy housewife? "Hey," the gym patron shouted, "less watching TV, more cleaning." Chloe sprayed the machine aggressively, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. She had gambled everything on a man's arrogance, and she had lost. She was 25 years old, with a criminal record for fraud, and a future that smelled like stale sweat and regret. She realized then that Judge Stone's question hadn't just ended the trial. It had ended her life. For Sarah, the victory in court was just the beginning. The real work was rebuilding a life that had been scorched to the ground. The first few months with Liam were a blur of exhaustion. Recovering the money took time. Forensic accountants had to claw it back from offshore accounts in the Caymans. For a while, Sarah and Liam lived in a small rental apartment. There were nights when Liam screamed with colic for hours, and Sarah sat on the floor weeping, wondering if Mark was right. Was she unfit? Was she too broken to do this alone? But every time she looked at Liam's face, so innocent, so dependent on her, the steel in her spine stiffened. She channeled her pain into her passion. She took the remaining funds from her savings and officially launched Phoenix Interiors. She didn't want to design cold, sterile penthouses for lawyers anymore. She wanted to create sanctuaries. Her first major client was a woman named Mariah, a survivor of a violent marriage who had just bought a small fixer-upper. "I don't have much of a budget," Maria had whispered, looking at the floor. I want the bedroom to feel safe. I haven't slept with the lights off in 5 years." Sarah had taken Maria's hand. "We're going to make it the safest room in the world." Sarah worked tirelessly. She sourced reclaimed wood, soft textiles, and warm lighting. She designed the room to feel like a warm embrace. When Maria saw the finished room, she collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing. That moment was worth more than any settlement check. Word spread. Phoenix Interiors became a symbol of starting over. Sarah's story, the decorator who outsmarted a corrupt lawyer, became part of her brand. She wasn't hiding from her past. She was using it as a foundation. By the time Liam's first birthday arrived, Sarah had bought back her original house. But she gutted it. She tore down the walls Mark had liked. She ripped out the cold marble he had insisted on. She filled the house with color, with life, with her. The afternoon of Liam's first birthday party was a sunny, golden day in Seattle. The backyard was filled with friends, new clients, and the sound of laughter. Sarah was cutting a slice of cake for Liam when the doorbell rang. She wiped frosting from her hands and walked to the front door. Standing there was Evelyn Stone. The judge was out of her robes, wearing a casual linen suit and a sun hat. She held a small, beautifully wrapped gift. "Judge Stone?" Sarah blinked in surprise. I didn't think you'd come. Please." The older woman smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "In my courtroom, I am Judge Stone. In your garden, I am Evelyn. And I wouldn't miss the birthday of the little boy who caused so much trouble in my docket." Sarah laughed, a genuine bubbling sound, and ushered her in. "Come in, please. There's iced tea and far too much cake." They sat on the newly built deck, watching Liam attempt to eat a strawberry, mostly smearing it on his face. "You know," Evelyn said thoughtfully, taking a sip of tea, "I've been thinking about that trial, about the day I asked Chloe that question. The question that ended it all," Sarah mused. "Yes. But here is the thing, Sarah." Evelyn turned to look at her, her gaze piercing but kind. "I asked the question because I saw the discrepancy in the dates. But the paperwork, the bank statements from the Caymans, they were organized perfectly, almost too perfectly. It was as if someone had arranged the breadcrumbs exactly where I would find them." Sarah swirled the ice in her glass, looking out at the garden. "And," Evelyn continued, "that anonymous tip to the clerk's office, the IP address was traced back to a library computer, but the login used a temporary guest pass issued to a S. Jenkins." Sarah smiled but didn't look away from her son. "Is that so?" "You knew," Evelyn stated. "It wasn't a question. You knew the whole time. You let him humiliate you. You let him drag you to court. You let him think he was winning." "Why wait?" Sarah finally turned to face the judge. Her eyes were clear and fierce. "Because, Evelyn," Sarah said softly, "if I had fought him in the beginning, it would have been a divorce case. He would have hidden half the money, paid a fine, and walked away to do it to someone else. He would have gotten visitation rights. He would have been in Liam's life, poisoning him with his toxicity." Sarah leaned forward. "I didn't want a divorce. I wanted an exorcism. I needed him to commit a crime in the open. I needed him to perjure himself. I needed him to be so confident that he would destroy himself completely. I had to let him break my heart so he couldn't break my son's future." Evelyn Stone stared at the young mother for a long moment. Then slowly, a look of profound respect spread across her face. She raised her glass. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Sarah Jenkins." "Deal." Sarah grinned, clinking her glass against the judge's. As the sun began to set, casting long, warm shadows across the grass, Sarah picked up Liam. He giggled, grabbing a fistful of her hair. She held him close, smelling the scent of baby shampoo and sunshine. Mark was in a concrete cell. Chloe was wiping down gym equipment. But Sarah was standing in the home she had built, holding the life she had protected, surrounded by the peace she had fought for. She had been mocked, scorned, and underestimated. But looking at the horizon, Sarah knew the truth. She hadn't just survived the storm. She was the storm. And now, finally, the sky was clear. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that arrogance often comes before a fall. Mark and Chloe thought they could use the legal system to bully a pregnant woman, believing her silence was weakness. They learned the hard way that a mother protecting her child is the most dangerous opponent of all. Sarah didn't just win a court case. She reclaimed her dignity and secured her son's future, proving that while lies may sprint, the truth runs a marathon. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Would you have waited to spring the trap or confronted them sooner? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of justice and karma satisfied you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from us. Thanks for watching.